We see warfare now, for example, you see the Russian-Ukraine war, which is, I would say, largely, or maybe 50%, are a drone war.
Yes, it is. Like the India-Pakistan May 2025 conflict.
Absolutely. We move away from hard cash currency towards digital transactions, digital currencies, digital wallets.
The United Nations itself is losing steam, The commitment of the US is not there.
There is a question over whether multilateralism can be reborn, but perhaps in different ways.
Different ways, yeah.
Is it possible to have, for example, regional groupings? Can regional groupings become more important?
Hello and welcome to New Wave History. Really pleased to be in the company of a very distinguished scholar, Professor Waqar Zaidi at LUMS, who is a professor of history and has authored several books and book chapters and papers on the history of technology, aviation, and how it's related to international power relations, etc. Welcome, Dr. Zaidi. Thank you so much for your time. And it's a pleasure to be in conversation. I wanted to talk to you about how technology as a driver of change in our times, I suppose the 20th and the 21st century, how is it panning out? How is it shaping the world or reshaping the world, if I may add? And so I guess we can start by what happened in the 20th century. That was a time of great technological innovations, upgradation, or what is also known as the contested idea of modernization. So tell us, how was the 20th century a kind of a century of technology in a way?
Thank you, Raza Saab. It's a real pleasure to be here and to be in conversation with you on what I think is a very pertinent, a very critical question that is impacting us today, and as you rightly said, has impacted us for centuries.
Yes,
in fact.
Yes.
In terms of the 20th century, as you've said, it's been a century of great technological change as the forces of modernization, industrialization, modernity have swept around the world. They have left behind many great social, cultural, political transformations.
Right.
And at the heart of these, what we see is technological change, material change, and industrialization.
Right.
So these processes have created many new technologies, many new ways of doing things, transformed our landscapes, transformed the way we work, actually changed who we are. Created whole new classes of people who behave in different ways and think in different ways. So it's no surprise then that technology has also impacted power relationships and international affairs.
Of course. Yeah.
So typically, when we think about technologies, we can think of them as tools that allow us to do things, to make an impact. So obviously, we can expect that they would be used in international relations because they give you power. They are tools of power, levers of power.
Right.
And, crudely put, when we may think about international relations, we may think about soft power and hard power. That is, I suppose, one way to classify the way international relations work. And in terms of hard power, we can think about technologies that directly allow states to impose their will or to carry out policies abroad. And here, of course, we look at military technologies.
Yes.
So there's been great change in military technologies. In fact, militaries have been at the forefront of technological innovation.
Exactly.
For much of the 20th century, arms and armaments, think of guns, tanks,
and why is
aviation.
that, Dr. Zaidi? Is it because they have more power, more resources, or because the 20th century was also the century of two great wars,
Absolutely. The 20th century has been a century of war.
Yeah.
And so technological armaments, technological change has been so important for states in the military sphere. It's been critical. And so in the 20th century, you see the development of all sorts of armaments that have given states power and leverage in international affairs, whether they use the armaments or not. So the point is that you don't have to use them on the battlefield, for them to give you power and leverage over other states.
Hmm.
In fact, some of the most powerful weapons have barely been used at all.
Yeah.
They stand as ominous threats that give states the power to impose their will over other states.
Like the nukes, for example.
Absolutely, like nuclear weapons, which have only been used twice on populations.
Hiroshima, Nagasaki.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki,
Yeah.
absolutely, in August 1945, at the end of the Second World War. And yet, from that point onwards, they've played an immense role in international affairs, given powers that have nuclear weapons the ability to have great influence in international affairs and great amounts of leverage. That's one of the reasons why many states have wanted nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
So much so, in fact, in international affairs, that sometimes we call the age that begins after 1945 the nuclear age.
The nuclear age, yes, very rightly said.
Absolutely.
So that also kind of reshaped the power system, because the victors of the Second World War, i.e. the US, Britain, France, I mean, they're all part of the nuclear club. And in a way, a post-1945 world order has been shaped by what the United States and its allies wanted, in effect. And part of the reason perhaps is linked to what you're rightly saying about that era being the nuclear age.
Yes, absolutely. So nuclear weapons gives immense power to countries, not only on the battlefield, but importantly in diplomacy.
Right.
So it allows you to bring influence to bear on other countries.
Right.
And that influence can be done behind closed doors, or it can be institutionalized in international organizations, which is what we see with the Security Council of the United Nations. So it's no coincidence that when we look at the 5 permanent members of the Security Council, we see countries that by 1960 were the only nuclear powers in the world. So in order of nuclear weapons, we're talking about the United States, the Soviet Union, Britain, France, and then China.
Yeah.
Of course, other countries then get nuclear weapons later on, but they're not admitted to the Security Council.
Including Pakistan.
Including Pakistan,
Much
India,
later,
and yes. And,
South Africa.
South Africa, which subsequently gave up nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
Israel,
yes.
North Korea.
Yeah. Oh, North Korea, yes.
Yes.
How could we forget?
Yes. And there were also countries, incidentally, which were, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, found themselves with nuclear weapons, but then decided to give them up.
Like Ukraine.
Like Ukraine, that's right. Yes.
Yeah. So this nuclear age is being sort of coming up, but there are also very destructive side to these weapons. I mean, like Hiroshima, Nagasaki experiment, and through the 20th century we see this of course projection of power, but also a very strong international movement, especially from the global south, on nuclear disarmament. And of course, that's still there, but less pronounced as it was perhaps in the 20th century.
Absolutely. So nuclear weapons are a class of weapons called weapons of mass destruction. And weapons of mass destruction really, in terms of actual use against people or infrastructure, are used against civilian populations. So that is their primary use. So they're deeply problematic, and that has obviously been realized by a lot of people who have demonstrated against them. And that's been a problem for policymakers. So you have weapons that you want to use to bring influence to bear, and yet these are weapons that cause immense damage to civilian people, infrastructure, societies, communities. Nuclear weapons is, of course, the one that's the most well known, but we also have biological weapons and chemical weapons.
Chemical weapons, yeah.
So there is what we call a great taboo against their use. That's why we don't usually see them being used. And yet they still are used to leverage and give power to states. So weapons of mass destruction, certainly there have been great attempts to rein back those weapons in terms of usage, in terms of testing, in terms of inventory, but those have only found very little success, unfortunately. And what we're seeing now is the spread of weapons of mass destruction. That process continues, and we're likely to see other states acquire more WMDs over the next 10, 20, 30 years.
Right. And, so just before I move on, I just want to quickly ask you, what were the key plans to contain the use or spread of nuclear weapons or other MDs, weapons of mass destruction? Many treaties, many international movements, they came into being, but they did not have much of an effect. Because we see subsequent nations, you just cited, including Pakistan, acquiring them. And of course, there's a strong argument, weaker countries also need to protect themselves, to have that kind of a power. But why did all these plans did not materialize,
I think there have been many treaties that have been proposed, that have been signed. So many have been proposed, a few have been signed, but you're absolutely right. They have failed to stop the proliferation of nuclear weapons. The underlying reason is simply that nuclear weapons give a lot of power to states. So states are hesitant to roll back or limit nuclear weapons themselves. And that has meant that it's difficult to get treaties off the ground, and it's difficult to get countries to sign them. Probably the most successful treaty has been the Test Ban Treaty.
Yes.
Which bans the use of nuclear weapons in the atmosphere, in atmospheric testing, and in various parts of the world. The only reason that treaty really has held up is because states have found other ways to test nuclear weapons without needing to explode them in the atmosphere. And they also realized that even if they carried out testing on the other side of the world, global climate patterns would carry the radiation back to their own populations. So there was a lot of also public pressure to end this from their own countries.
Right.
So there are various reasons why that treaty has held up, but that treaty hasn't stopped the proliferation of weapons. And they continue to.
And they continue to. Anyway, let's from the nuclear weapons and the military technology, 20th century was also the century of the computer. So, if I may put it like that in very lay terms. And of course, by the 1990s, even when I was a student, we used to, we did not have much access to computers. They were still coming up, as essays were handwritten, research was library-based. But then within the last decade of the 20th century, the world changed, so to speak. And prior to that, of course, that work on a supercomputer and other technologies was being worked. How much of that change impacted the world, both in terms of the power relations, because obviously the leader in that innovation was the West, and the rest of the world was more of a, user. But now big tech has kind of made that into a big corporate business as well. But certainly it did impact the way the world worked. So let's talk a bit about that.
Absolutely. No, you bring up a very important technology, which has had all sorts of impacts on the world. I would put, one way to understand technologies is to put them on a spectrum.
Okay.
Between technologies that are very focused and very narrow in their use, and technologies which are so widespread in their use that they end up in a lot of different things, and they end up impacting a lot of different things.
Right.
The microprocessor is one example of that type of technology. That's sometimes called a general purpose technology. That's one way to think about them. So other general purpose technologies are things like electricity, for example.
Yes. Again, that was also a 20th century spread.
Absolutely. So these technologies end up in so many different things. Just looking around the table today, just in front of us, we can see that the microprocessor is in at least, I would say, 10 different things just on this table alone. And readers will also see microprocessors in a lot of the objects that they would have around, in their homes around them. So microprocessors lead to computers. They lead to computerization. They lead to the ability to automate tasks, to carry out huge amounts of computational analyses in a very quick amount of time. So what they allow states to do is, several other things. First, they increase the wealth of states.
Of course.
Both countries that manufacture them, but even countries that use them. So even if you import them, they have all sorts of economic impacts, usually benefits. So computerization has helped to increase the world's GDP. It has improved or increased or given rise to new types of industrial and economic processes. That has given a lot of states a lot of power. So that, I think it feeds directly into power. That's the first point. And the second point is, of course, that they end up in lots of different technologies that then can be used. They could be used for weapons in international affairs, of course. Nowadays, most weapons are computerized in some way or
power
another.
grid systems, water management. It's like such wide, as you said, general purpose, but widespread implications.
Absolutely. And they end up in things like transport and communications, which has had a massive impact on international affairs.
Right.
So absolutely, microprocessor, very, very important. I would also highlight shipping and aviation.
Correct. Aviation, another 20th century. We'll come to that. So because the computerization is going to lead us into many other territories. So let's go back. Electricity, you said, which of course we saw even in our region, from the early 20th century to late. I mean, although we are still not 100% electrified in Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, but still, I mean, it has transformed human lives.
Absolutely. It's transformed human lives in all sorts of ways, as we know. But when we think about states and their power, then I think the key point we have to remember is that technologies are tools that need to be made, used, and maintained. That takes money and resources.
Correct.
Right? So generally, states that are wealthier are able to use technologies and maintain them more than states that are weaker. So typically we see that states that are wealthier have more technologies and thus have more power that they can bring to bear in international affairs.
Correct.
And electricity plays an important part in that. All these general purpose technologies generally do. In fact, there used to be a time where a metric of industrialization used to be electrification. Right? It used to be your communications, the number of telephones that
even now electrification is used as a metric to look at development.
Absolutely.
Because that's what we used to see. How many villages are electrified or not. So absolutely. I mean, it's still in vogue because it kind of opens up so many possibilities,
absolutely.
For populations.
So
aviation. Let's come to you. Another area of your expertise and interest, I suppose, your passion is aviation, and of course, the aviation technologies and its growth is a full-scale story. So tell us a bit about that. How that has come to also not just define states' power, redefine states' role, but also communications. They have changed drastically from the middle of 20th century to our present era.
Yes, absolutely. So aviation sits alongside other transport and communications technologies, which have done a couple of things on the world stage. Firstly, as we all know, they've helped to globalize the world and interconnect the world in so many different ways. Aviation is not the primary technology there. You have things like shipping, which has been critical to create globalized trade before aviation really played much of a role in globalized. So shipping is very critical, remains critical today. And then you have communications like telegraph, international telegraph, telephone, and now satellite communications. So these have created a globalized world. And that has changed kind of the stage and the platform on which states and peoples kind of communicate with each other. So that's been critical. And then on the other side, we also saw aviation being used for military means, and it's transformed military warfare greatly.
Since the Second World War, where air power was also came into play.
Absolutely, absolutely, and these transformations are ever ongoing. So we see warfare now. For example, you see the Russian-Ukraine war, which is, I would say, largely, or maybe 50%, are a drone war.
Yes, it is. It is like the India-Pakistan May 2025 conflict.
Absolutely,
drone and Rafales versus the Chinese JF-17s.
Absolutely.
So
and that conflict brings up a very interesting point, which is that here you have two nuclear armed powers where nuclear weapons didn't play a role at all.
Right? Or even ground troops have played a minimal role.
In fact, the most important role was with aviation technology. So manned aircraft, UAVs, airborne radar systems. So aviation remains critical. In fact, it's probably becoming more critical for warfare, and we've seen that in the Middle East now and in Northeast Africa, where you're seeing states intervening in their region using aerial technologies. We see that in Yemen, see that in Sudan, see that in Somalia, and various other places.
Very interesting, for the military perspective, from a people's perspective, from a communications perspective. Now, I also have a kind of a very raw thesis. I mean, for our region, South Asia, I mean, I think the one big moment or a communications revolution came about in mid to late 19th century when the railways were put into place in modern then India, British India. And that, of course, changed the way India was, because India was this disparate communities and states and provinces. And for once, they came together, alongside the British, sort of idea of, colonial, subjects in a territory. But they started communicating, and then that led to the nationalist contributed to the nationalist movement, awareness, political awareness. And I feel that, that second moment has arrived in late 20th century, with the rise of, computerization, aviation, telegraph, you mentioned, and then the World Wide Web, etc., and the cellular technology. We'll come to that as well. And I guess a lot of things that we are looking at. I mean, look at the students in Nepal using Discord for communicating. Earlier the Arab Spring kids using in the Middle East using Facebook and other technologies. In Bangladesh, in Sri Lanka, they are these new technological interventions are creating a new kind of a society as well. So I'm always very interested in the technology and society relationship, right?
Yeah, I mean, that is also very, very exciting. And it's absolutely transforming us and our communities in all sorts of ways, which I think some of which we can see and some of which I think we will discover as the years go on. I think I would maybe like to highlight two processes. One is that a lot of these technologies make states themselves stronger.
Right.
And that's particularly true for transport and communications technologies.
Correct.
So aviation, telephones, telegraph, railways are important for allowing states to exert sovereignty and power over their territories, allowing them to control their territories, allowing them to set up centralized bureaucratic systems, to map their territories, to be able to carry out policies.
Right.
So if you go back a few hundred years, the rulers of states may have wanted to do things, but it was difficult for them to enact those policies within their own territories. Now it's a lot easier because states have more control, more influence, more power over their territories and their populations. And technology plays an important role in that. It helps to kind of knit states together, right? So aviation has been very important, and railways, as you say, and roads, and and telecommunications and mobiles for states like India, Pakistan,
yeah.
or for any kind of large state.
I mean, look at the numbers in Pakistan. 190 million subscribers. I know people have multiple connections.
Absolutely.
But it's mind-boggling.
Absolutely.
And, you know, how information is being shared. Because even when I was growing up, Dr. Zaidi, we did not have much sources of information. You know, the state media was controlled. There was just BBC radio that you would tune in. Sometimes it was a good reception or not, and you would know what was happening in the country and elsewhere in the world. Other than that, you did not have those sources of information, which are inconceivable now.
Absolutely. So the other big change that's happened within, globally is that there has been this democratization of access to news and access to platforms to produce your own news, so access to communications. Now, democratization is a problematic word.
Yes, it is. Yeah.
But what I mean to say is that it's much more available to the poor, to greater segments of society.
Correct.
All the way across the spectrum. If someone wants to say something now, they can put out a YouTube video, or I guess nowadays put out a TikTok video. Right? And TikTok is available to the masses, to both the rich and the poor.
TikTok is the thing, you know, everywhere in the world at the moment.
Absolutely. So it's possible for people to communicate in all sorts of ways at a very grassroots level. Now, of course, that can lead to things like the Arab Spring. It can lead to uprisings against state authority, or it can also lead to all sorts of other movements, demonstrations, political programs that can often lead to violence as well.
Unfortunately, yes.
So
absolutely.
It can have all sorts of impacts. The point is that it can mobilize people at the grassroots level very quickly using information that can be very quickly manufactured and disseminated. The information might be true or false, whatever it is. It is a form of news that can be spread amongst groups of people very, very quickly. So absolutely, this is a sea change to how news would have been spread, 50 years ago or even 30 years ago.
Yes, exactly. But Dr. Zaidi, now that we've talked a bit about state power and how states have instrumentalized technologies, in furtherance of their, let's say, the objectives to control or maximize power, or etc. Now, obviously, that has its downside as well, because we also see that the levels of state repression or authoritarian tendencies have also gone up, and also in, let's say, the case of Pakistan, or let's say the case of, other comparable countries where militaries are very powerful and with military technologies and military power, and its projection, you have some downstream effects as well on people. So talk a bit about that. What on balance has the 20th century technological developments on balance have been good for the humanity, or bad, or mixed, or I know it's a very journalistic question, but people would like to know.
Well, that's a question that actually people have been debating and grappling with for actually more than 100 years.
Right.
Are these great technological material transformations, are they good or bad? And as you rightly say, they have both positive and negative effects. I think it's very difficult to weigh them up. Certainly, so many people have died in warfare, in technological warfare, that it's hard to see the benefit in that sense, a lot of these technologies. On the other hand, we have seen the growth of middle classes, the growth of wealth, increased food production.
Yes.
We've seen a lot of changes that have lifted people
Green Revolution, wheat and rice and etc. Yeah.
We've seen a transformation in the poverty profile of countries. If you look at countries maybe 300, 200 years ago, most people would have been poor or starving. There are still many, many starving people around the world, but as a percentage in countries, they have reduced. That's certainly true. So yeah, I mean, it's both positive
Yeah. It's
both positive
I know.
and negative. I think I would say that technologies are used generally by people who can accumulate money to spend on them, so capital. So they tend to benefit the wealthy, the wealthier states. The wealthier states are the more technologies they can use to make themselves stronger, and that often, unfortunately, means controlling your population in ways that the population may not want to be controlled. And
Exactly.
at the least troublesome, we see surveillance. Right?
Oh yeah.
And increasingly, all states are becoming surveillance states.
They've become, I mean, where I live, the United States has the most sophisticated and huge surveillance systems on their own people after 9/11. They installed them.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Great surveillance systems are in operation. These can work online, digitally, to kind of track a person and build your profile based on what you do digitally, or they can physically track a person. So, I saw some statistic that, everyone who's in London is photographed by at least or caught on at least, 10 cameras
My God.
every day.
And now there's facial recognition.
And now there's facial recognition that allows them to identify who that person is and tie them to their digital profile, to their bank accounts, to various other things. So digital surveillance and the kind of the digital control of people is increasing now as we move away from hard cash currency towards digital transactions, digital currencies, digital wallets. So these things are increasingly coming into use and being promoted by states because it allows them to control and to surveil, monitor, control transactions, monetary transactions. So absolutely, modern states are increasingly, or want to be, aspire to be, if they don't always hit the mark, surveillance states.
Yes, surveillance states. Yeah. That's something that has been the kind of downside of this development. But anyway, let's go back to the end of 20th century, because the story gets even more complicated. I mean, more, I suppose, intense. We talked about computerization, microprocessors, worldwide, the sort of arrival of World Wide Web, which has also changed a lot of our lives. So how do historians like you see that, at a global or perhaps at that level? I mean, because I remember when World Wide Web was there, similar concerns were expressed by people. Oh, this is going to be so bad, or this is going to do this, or it has harmful effects. But in fact, it has turned out to be now in the last 25 years or so, 30 years, it's becoming more and more a central part of our daily routines, and states, the way states conduct themselves. So how do you see that?
Yeah. Look, absolutely. Whenever a new technology arises, it's fairly well known that you end up with a lot of people discussing the technology before it's really spread or had a widespread impact. And we see this, for example, with the internet in the very early 90s, where there's a lot of talk about the internet, but it isn't really used that much, and then use increases. Technologies do tend to spread. I mean, that is almost a fundamental law of technologies.
Right.
They always spread.
Correct.
So microprocessors, so technologies are created by wealthier segments of society, by wealthier countries, but then they generally tend to spread everywhere else to everyone else as well. And the internet is an example of that. Some, of course, are easier to spread because they're cheaper, they're easier to use. Once again, the internet is an example of that, or mobile phone technologies. Others are more expensive, like nuclear weapons and airplanes and things. But they all do spread. Absolutely. And I would say that, a lot of these technologies will spread. That is for certain. Their use does spread. And we have to accommodate ourselves to them, right?
Yeah.
So you see this with the internet. You see this with computerization. And we're seeing it now with AI, for example.
With AI, exactly.
Yeah, it's something that's here. It's something that is a tool that can be used for both positive or negative means. It's a tool of empowerment. So it does empower people, but obviously the more resources you have, then the more you can use these tools to maybe empower yourself more than somebody who perhaps doesn't have those resources
Those
or
have,
that
yeah.
capital.
So about the AI you just preempted me. I mean, that is now the current subject of, I suppose, a heated international global debate, because there's a whole group of people who are saying that, what about ethics? This sort of unstoppable rise and exploration of AI technologies and their furtherance will have huge ethical implications, in terms of both, copying human, copying or mechanizing human creativity, even the thinking process, its impact on education, its impact on society, its impact on every field. I mean, in a way, it's reminiscent of the World Wide Web debate as well, but this has huge potential risks with even nuclear safety, with even arms, because as we mentioned, all the states are now using computerized systems to maintain their arms and use their arms. And with the artificial intelligence misuse of that technology could have serious potential devastating consequences. I mean, what would you say about that?
Yes, absolutely. So the large language models that we see spreading at great pace around us today are already changing the way we work on a daily basis. They're changing the way corporations work, the way things are made and produced, not only in the creative side of creative industries, but also in professional services, in industrialization and industrial plants. So AI is being used in all sorts of processes, and its use will only increase. And of course, all we're seeing today really are these various types of LLM, large language models, but then there will probably be other types of AI systems that will be developed and used in all sorts of ways.
Right.
Yes, absolutely. So they will transform the way things are made. They will allow corporations and people to make things more cheaply, to produce things more quickly, which is, of course, what a lot of profit-driven companies want to do, to make things more efficiently. So we'll certainly see that. Expanding profitability and efficiency, but also, I think, putting a lot of people out of work. Just as, if you look at a snapshot of a typical office in 1950, you will see an office bustling with people writing things down on pieces of paper, making records on pieces of paper, using typewriters. But if you look at a similar office producing similar types of functions just 50 or 100 or maybe 70, 80 years later. So today you'll see an office that it really only has 2 people in it, let's say, producing the same amount of stuff, right? So what you'll see a similar thing, I think, with AI, where a lot of jobs will go.
Yeah.
Because they'll be automated. So I see currently LLMs as offering great mechanization, right? And automation. So a continuation of what computers and calculators, for example, have been doing for
earlier for the maths.
for decades. So that's going to continue. So we'll see that continuing. But yes, there are great risks, because AI can be used to increase the deadliness of weapons and to produce new types of weapons. So I think something which we're increasingly going to see now are autonomous battlefield weapons.
Right. Exactly.
And autonomous battlefield weapons have the capacity to actually spread conflict, because it would be possible for states to use these weapons without endangering their own populations or their own soldiers, right? Currently, that's carried out using aviation. So if you want to kind of intervene militarily somewhere, you would do so using drones and UAVs without endangering your own military forces. But increasingly, you could do it using these kind of automated weapons. They could be robots. They could be other types of weapons, guns that fire automatically, for example. I think increasingly we'll see more of those. So that's one area. And the other area, of course, is cybersecurity and cyber warfare. I think increasingly you'll see the use of AI to ramp up.
So that's a big threat. I mean, just
Absolutely.
imagine with the cyber warfare intensifying.
Absolutely. And cyber warfare is already a reality.
Already
so
a reality,
states already have armies of programmers that are carrying out cyber warfare on other states.
So what is the way to address all of these? I mean, how can we regulate something as spread out, as global, where yes, a few countries are taking the lead, but generally, I mean, how do you navigate this?
It's immensely challenging because technologies proliferate.
Yeah.
So LLM models, once they're developed, are often, especially the Chinese, for example, have just put them up on the internet.
Yes,
So
free of cost.
Yes, so anyone can kind of take them, use them, change them, train them, develop them in all sorts
There's
of ways.
a new one, Kimi 2, which I believe is a Chat GPT equivalent, but for free.
Yes, absolutely. So so these technologies spread. I mean, all you really need are a technically proficient workforce to be able to use and develop them, which some countries have and some don't have, to kind of various degrees. So technologies proliferate. I think that's one issue. The other issue is that it's hard to control and limit technologies that have so many different uses, right? It is possible, for example, to have strict regulations and international rules on, let's say, chemical warfare, right? Or bacterial bioweapons.
Correct.
Because those are developed in very particular ways.
Sure.
Right?
Sure.
But it's hard to do it for something, for technologies that have such widespread use. Very challenging. They have attempted, there have been many attempts in the past to tackle these technologies, but they've all failed.
They've all failed, yeah.
So I do think that we should be thinking carefully about how to limit them. But historically, what we see is that you need a commitment to international organization, to international regulation, before you can even start to regulate these technologies. And unfortunately, the way international politics has been going over the past, a few years has been away from multilateralism. It's been away from international organizations. International organizations are weaker now than they've been at any point over the past, 10, 20, 30, 40 years.
I was coming to that because we started with the post-1945 world, and right here in 2026, now we are, the United Nations itself is losing steam, The commitment of the US is not there, and others are so in the absence of that, this is going to be a big challenge for humanity,
It is, absolutely. And, as, these kind of big global organizations like the UN start to lose power, there is a question over whether multilateralism can be reborn, but perhaps in different ways.
Different ways, yeah.
Is it possible to have, for example, regional groupings? Can regional groupings become more important? Is it possible to have technical organizations that are very narrowly and technically focused? Some of these are still very important today, such as international technical organizations that regulate aviation, for example, or that regulate internet addresses, or that regulate international telecommunications. So I'm giving examples of organizations that are still very important today. So do we need more of those? Can there be more of those? Can they have an impact? Those are all very, very important questions that I think people are thinking very carefully about. And I would hope that we can start to see more multilateralism in whatever ways might be possible, because otherwise the challenges that these technologies bring may well overwhelm us.
Right.
And I would add that, of course, that the world today faces not just challenges from these technologies, but really environmental challenges.
That's what I was about to. Yeah, thank you for raising that. Because another big impact of this century of change has been what we've done to the planet. in terms of climate change, environmental degradation, etc., etc.
Absolutely.
And just look at plastics.
Absolutely.
Plastics are a great invention in some ways, but now we know about microplastics reaching our brain.
Absolutely. And the point, of course, is that we live in an interconnected world where pollution or the effects of industrialization, consumerism are not limited to state boundaries.
Yeah.
Right? So absolutely not. So the only way you can solve actually, for example, pollution over Punjab in Pakistan is by having a conversation with India, because we are one linked climactic zone over the Punjab and northern regions of both these countries. So, and that's just one example. There are many, many examples, even on a global basis. I mean, global warming is probably the best known. So the problems of the day, whether they come from technology or from industrialization, consumerism, and environmental impact, require multilateral approaches.
Absolutely. No other way.
No other way.
Yeah.
And more important now than ever before.
Absolutely.
And I think that's something that I think people are starting to realize.
Yes,
right?
yes.
But I think that there are political forces that have moved against this, unfortunately. And I think that we have to try to impress this upon our policymakers, that we need these connections. We need these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely. And everywhere. I mean, even in Pakistan. I mean, it's we have very basic drafts of policies, but nobody knows what's happening with them. But Dr. Zaidi, this has been such a fascinating conversation. Thank you so much, and I've learned a lot, and I'm sure those who are listening to you will also learn. So many concepts and ideas have emerged that I'm tempted to actually sit down with you again and explore one bit by bit. But thanks for being with us.
Thank you very much. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.